Welcome once again to High Desert Radio, the voice of the Jewish Federation of New Mexico. Our host on this edition, Marvin Gottlieb.
Hello, I'm Marvin Gottlieb, and I'm the immediate past president of the Jewish Federation of New Mexico. And I'm sitting here today with Ron Hart, who is the current president of the Jewish Federation of New Mexico. And we're going to spend the next half hour trying to get to know Ron a little bit better so that when you folks deal with the Federation, you understand something about our leadership. So, Ron, welcome. So glad to talk to you today. I'm very pleased with the succession that we've had at the Jewish Federation. As a way of beginning, just provide us with some background on yourself. For example, how did you come to settle in New Mexico?
Thank you, Marvin, for inviting me to be a part of this today. And also for the work that you've done in setting this up and getting it started as a way of communication with the community. Actually, my connection with New Mexico started as a child, and I used to spend my summers out here visiting my favorite aunt and uncle, and so I grew up with the summer vacation enchantment of New Mexico, always thinking that this is the place I wanted to live. And so here we are.
Right. Well, of course, we know you're an anthropologist of some note, and that you run Gowen Books and Films out of Santa Fe. And in fact, our first executive president from Santa Fe, and we're very pleased with the way that connection is growing these days. But let's focus on your connection with the Jewish community. You seem to have made, through your publishing company, through your community efforts, some exceptional efforts to promote Jewish intellectual and artistic life. How has that come about?
You know, it's a matter of having that life and living in it. And coming out of an academic background, I was always involved in publishing and, in fact, as an anthropologist in filmmaking. And it was simply a matter of that evolving over time to saying, okay, there are voices in the Jewish community that are not being published, and there's subjects in terms of videos and short video documentaries that there's an audience for. And so it evolved over time, and so we set up Gowen Books in about 15 years ago, and we've had the privilege of publishing books that I think that have made some contribution, and in different areas. Some of them had to do with Jewish history, some with the Sephardic world, because we've had that connection, and now in North Africa, again, we have family contacts there. And these are Jewish stories that are not always as well known, and so we wanted to make those available. So that's kind of how Gowen Books and Gowen Films have developed. Mm-hmm. And we had the privilege also of meeting people along the way, like, for example, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who really started the Jewish renewal movement. We got to know him and published some of his books. So those books became winners of Best Book Awards, and it opened up more avenues. We met more people. And so interestingly enough, the authors now run from Israel to California, basically, and many places in between. So it's been a good adventure.
Right. You mentioned one of the influencers for this. Were there other major influencers that sort of turned you in the direction of this work as it was developing?
You know, one person I have to mention, my wife's sister, an anthropologist, Nina Friedemann, who she and I worked very closely together, and we had a kind of the thing that evolved over time. Nina wrote very extensively, and we always discussed the thing of maybe this could actually become a publishing venture. And so I have to mention her name. So Gloria, my wife, Gloria Balabalan, has been the
wonderful lady
partner in all of this process. And her sister Nina, we were the three that worked together. And unfortunately, Nina passed away, but Gloria and I were able to continue with the dream that the three of us really had initially.
While we in the Albuquerque, Santa Fe area know you as a civic leader and as a publisher of Jewish materials, and also an instigator for some wonderful Jewish programming, much of which we're looking forward to, some fairly soon, and we'll ask you to talk a little bit about that as well. But first, perhaps there are some who don't know you as an author. Can you tell us something about your publications? Is there a consistent pattern of interest on your part in terms of your research and writing?
For me personally?
Yeah.
Okay. Ethnohistory, So my training background is in cultural anthropology, and I had the fortune of studying with David Bidney at Indiana University, who was a leader in working with culture and understanding how culture worked in the Jewish community. And kind of growing from that, that's where my writing interests have continued. So I've done an introductory book on Judaism, and we have a plethora. We have a world of books on Judaism, but each one of us has a statement we'd like to make about it. So there was, so I did one on that, which really, for me, was looking at the ethno-history of the Jewish experience, the cultural history of being Jewish. And then more recently, I did a book on Sephardic Jews, again, doing the same thing, looking at what is the cultural history of this group of people, looking not only the experience in Spain, but then what happened in the diaspora after the expulsion and people scattered around the Mediterranean and the Ottoman Empire and Morocco and other places, and what was the cultural history that happened there. So that's been really personally and the unwritten book, of course, that's
we all
always
have
there.
Those, yes.
Yeah, the one that is supposed to be done,
right,
is a carryover from having lived in Colombia all those years. And Colombia had one of the three major offices of the Inquisition in the Americas, and there actually was a Jewish community in the city of Cartagena in Colombia. And one of the discussions I've had with Stan Horthes about this was in the colonial period when Jews were not legally allowed to be in Spanish territory. So Stan said, they're crypto Jews. The actual fact is they were hidden in a sense, but these were people who had a minyan. They met on Shabbat. They had services. They had someone who led services. They had an active community, and they could have it at that time in Colombia because the authorities were looking the other way and didn't really care that much. But there was a certain point when the order came from the crown in Spain to crack down on the Jews, and they did have to go into hiding or leave. So I've collected the material over that and done the research on the names, and it's incredible the information that we can actually have from records of names of people, who they were, what they did, what their businesses were, who their families were. that story is the unwritten book that.
Well, it sounds fascinating, and we'll be eagerly looking for that publication. Not that I want to put more work on you right now, because I'd like to turn our attention to the Jewish Federation and ask now, as president of the Jewish Federation of New Mexico, what do you see as the greatest challenges going forward? And give us a little high-level idea of what your plans are for addressing them.
It seems to me that the Federation is the Jewish service organization that really can meet the needs of Jews throughout the state. And thinking in terms of the Federation in that sense, it reaches across religious boundaries to people who are affiliated or unaffiliated. The Federation gives such important services from the time that someone is a child and learning about Judaism until people are older in life and needing the assistance that sometimes is needed at that point. The Federation is there. So with that vision, with that understanding of the Federation, and looking at it as the decision was made some years back that it be a statewide organization, the thing comes to say, okay, how can the Federation most effectively be present beyond the two major urban centers of Albuquerque and Santa Fe? And how can the Federation help Jewish life in New Mexico? Then we start, using one of your phrases, we start getting into the weeds, the details of how that is carried out, from the annual campaign to provide resources to help Jewish life, to identifying the various organizations that are doing all this worthwhile work. And we start looking at them, just recently looking at there are some 40 programs that the Federation funds throughout the state of New Mexico. Mm-hmm. So it's this responsibility, the sense of responsibility of how are the needs of those organizations met in the different parts of New Mexico, and starting with the major population in Albuquerque and then expanding beyond that to the others.
Mm-hmm. If we look into the future and we try to envision a New Mexico with a vibrant Jewish community, and let's assume for a moment that Federation and other organizations with Federation support have been successful. What do you see? What is the hope for the New Mexico Jewish community? How does it look in the future if we're successful, relating to the Jewish community itself, but even beyond that, relating to the Jewish community's relationship to New Mexico as a whole?
One of the things that I think is important, for example, in the Jewish Care Program, we might think initially, given the name Jewish Care Program, that it only addresses the needs of Jewish people who are in need. But the actual fact is the program addresses people beyond the Jewish community. And I think this is one of the important things also, that the larger community around us understands, that the work of the Jewish Federation, although is very much oriented toward Jewish life, but it's also about being a responsible member of the larger society. And it's not only about being Jewish, it's also about being New Mexican. It's about being people who are in need of, whether it be education or other kinds of needs that come there. The Jewish Federation is present.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to mention that one of the impacts that you've already had on the organization and on the community is with using your rich background and contacts, the kind of programming that you've been bringing to the community just in the short time that you have been present as president. One of our initiatives, our new initiatives, is what we call the Jewish university. So maybe you could take a minute or so and talk a little bit about that, and maybe something about one of the upcoming programs that you have.
Yeah, the Jewish University is, although it is not a university as such, but it is the idea of having in a sense, a continuing ed program where we can invite established speakers on Jewish history and on Jewish subjects. And one of the speakers who is coming now, actually the inaugural event for this in Santa Fe is Shalom Savar, who is an art historian from Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And he's a specialist on Jewish art history. And he is coming with a talk about Rembrandt and the Bible and the Jews, looking particularly at Rembrandt's connection with the Jewish community in Amsterdam. And he has an interesting point, which is that he thinks that it was that connection with the Jewish community that helped make Rembrandt's art exceptional. And to use his words, became better and more sophisticated because of his contact with the community. So it's interesting. We all know that Rembrandt did the portraits of many Jewish people, and he lived in the Jewish community himself. So it's fascinating to get into these details of life that come out about major art figures who was not Jewish himself, but whose involvement in the Jewish community contributed to making his art great. And we will be having another speaker coming up soon, Dr. Alma Gottlieb, who is...
no relation, I know.
No relation, interestingly enough, yes. But she is now at Brown University and is doing some very interesting work on Sephardic Jews. And this actually has a connection to New Mexico, because in New Mexico we know about crypto Jews and people who came out of a Jewish background and then with the expulsion and the Inquisition converted. She has done some work with a parallel community in Cape Verde, which is another part of the world. But here we're having a similar experience. In Cape Verde, there were conversos, people who were Jewish and converted. And she's followed up on their history, seeing what their descendants today, how they're dealing with that background. What does it mean to them? What are they trying to do with it? So Alma Gottlieb will be here as one of the next speakers, speaking on that subject, which is a parallel subject to the New Mexico experience.
Wow. Well, we are certainly looking forward to these programs. If they are anywhere near the quality of the ones that we have already experienced, we're in for a wonderful experience indeed. Ron, thank you for letting us delve into your life a little bit here to introduce you to some people who might not otherwise be able to get to know you. And as immediate past president, I welcome you aboard, and I assure you, myself and the rest of the executive committee and the board will provide you with all the support that you need, and we're really looking forward to your having a very successful tenure. Thank you very much.
That's it for this edition of High Desert Radio. Thanks so much for listening. High Desert Radio is the voice of the Jewish Federation of New Mexico. Remember, in order for us to continue providing quality programs like High Desert Radio and to continue our work in service to Jewish seniors, Holocaust survivors, low-income families, children, young professionals, Israel, and more, the Jewish Federation of New Mexico relies entirely on the generosity of listeners like you. Make your contribution today to jewishnewmexico.org. Remember, you can subscribe to this series on iTunes, and be sure to visit us at jewishnewmexico.org. Till next time, for High Desert Radio, I'm David Wolf.